This is Countdown to Economic Collapse, February 12th, 2012. I'm David John Sponheim, running for president under America's Third Party. Well, America has good news. Our nation's economy has effectively been masked over with amazing printing of money by the Federal Reserve and loaning that money out to countless banks that continue to put that money away in little safe places so that they can make more money on their money. The problem is, those banks aren't loaning to businesses. They aren't creating jobs, so people are still unemployed. 14 million people are still unemployed since 2008. Obama claims he created 3.2 million jobs, when in fact he lost 2.6 million during that time period, so he really didn't do too well. The housing market lost $750 billion over the past year in terms of value, and the government just announced they're going to put together a $25 billion relief package with 5 banks. The problem is, people who have loans with Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae are not covered by this $25 billion relief program. And that $750 billion worth of value lost in the housing sector, it's still lost. Those people have essentially lost their life savings. The good news is, they've masked over all these problems with little band-aids that they think are going to make the people of America happy so that they'll vote for Barack Obama again in 2012. Do you think it's working? Do you think this Soviet-style propaganda technique is working with the American people? In 1956, Nikita Khrushchev declared, "We will bury you," when referring to the United States. Later, tensions and hostilities increased with Kennedy, and then they launched a propaganda campaign against the United States.
Caliber. Only about 15% of time, money, and manpower is spent on espionage as such. The other 85% is a slow process which we call either ideological subversion or active measures, активные мероприятия in the language of the KGB, or psychological warfare. What it basically means is to change the perception of reality of every American to such an extent that despite of the abundance of information, no one is able to come to sensible conclusions in the interests of defending themselves, their families, their community, and their country. It's a great brainwashing process which goes very slow, and it's divided in 4 basic stages. The first one being demoralization. It takes from 15 to 20 years to demoralize a nation. The demoralization process in the United States is basically completed already. Most of it is done by Americans to Americans, thanks to lack of moral standards. As I mentioned before, exposure to true information does not matter anymore. A person who was demoralized is unable to assess true information. The facts tell nothing to him. The next stage is destabilization. This time, subverter does not care about your ideas and the patterns of your consumption. Whether you eat junk food and get fat and flabby, doesn't matter anymore. This time, and it takes only from 2 to 5 years to destabilize a nation, the influence of Marxist-Leninist ideas in the United States is absolutely fantastic. I could never believe it 14 years ago when I landed in this part of the world that the process. The next stage, of course, is crisis. It may take only up to 6 weeks to bring a country to the verge of crisis. You can see it in Central America now. And after crisis, with a violent change of power, structure, and economy, you have so-called the period of normalization. It may last indefinitely. Normalization is a cynical expression borrowed from Soviet propaganda. When the Soviet tanks moved into Czechoslovakia in '68, Comrade Brezhnev said, "Now the situation in brotherly Czechoslovakia is normalized." This is what will happen in the United States if you allow all these schmucks to bring the country to crisis.
You see how the media begins to slip in a message of ground troop involvement in areas like Syria. It happened in Libya. You remember what happened there. NATO forces went in and took over Muammar Gaddafi, ended up killing him, and now there's an Islamist state in Libya. Well, Syria is not inclined to let that happen. They're actually moving very hard against rebel forces that are getting support from the Western world, and they're going to try to squash any effort to foment an Arab Spring in Syria. But The media here in America will continue to try to fan the flame of aggression against Syria so that we could get engaged in yet another war. Now, guess what war is for? War is to make you completely look the other way and blame war for the default of the dollar. You see, the default of the dollar is coming because of the way that they keep printing it up and handing it out for next to nothing to big banks. The default of the dollar will be the big crisis that's looming, but they'll pretend like it's a war that's causing it. And what they're going to do is initiate some sort of a war, whether it's in Pakistan, in Iran, or in Syria. They're going to try to use that as cover, as a facade, a reason for why the dollar is dropping in value. And this technique has been used time and time before, and it is part of the propaganda machine's control of our nation's mentality. Now, as the American people become more aware and wise to this Soviet-style propaganda technique that's being used here in America, we will begin to insulate ourselves from the stupidity of our leaders and start to gain ground.
Now we have something else to worry about. This Russian, Yuri Milner, is poised to take over a big position at Facebook. The magazine Wired features an article by Michael Wolff. How Russian tycoon Yuri Milner bought his way into Silicon Valley. Now, this Yuri Milner has gone from zero equity to $12 billion in equity in just the past 2 years. And we are seeing that his investment in Facebook started with a $200 million investment. And in some ways, he made a deal that nobody else had ever done. He established a way in which he could get the right of first refusal on any other Facebook stock that changes hands. It puts him in a very interesting position. He's at the point where he could actually buy up the IPO itself. Now, what we are seeing here is his connection to Goldman Sachs as being integral. The appraisal of Facebook at $50 billion to $100 billion started with a $500 million offer from Goldman Sachs. Actually, it wasn't Goldman Sachs only. It was Goldman agrees to put $375 million of its own capital against Milner's $125 million. This is his house. He just purchased this $100 million house, the most expensive house in Los Altos Hills. He is beyond an up-and-comer. He is a person who is right now got his fingers on the pulse of one of America's top companies. And all of it's being underwritten by Goldman Sachs with the interesting connection to the World Bank. You see, Milner studied and worked for the World Bank for 3 years. And that makes him connected to the most powerful families of Eastern Europe's elite, which is very interesting. He is working to create investment strategies for his company. Indeed, among the earlier backers of the investment fund Digital Sky Technologies was Alisher Usmanov, one of the richest men in Russia, who even other Russian oligarchs find, to say the least, a little dodgy. His resume includes alleged Kremlin association and an overturned conviction for fraud and extortion. He has a near $18 billion fortune in mining, steel, telecom. Interesting. So, he's one of the investors with Milner in Digital Sky Technologies. So we are looking right now at the backbone of what could be a takeover of our information stream by the Russian elites. Now, Milner owns 9% share in Facebook, but because of his first right of refusal option, which he got early on in the deal with Mark Zuckerberg, he could veritably take over a large chunk of Facebook.
As your president, I will initiate a plan to consolidate our resources in America, beef up our proven oil reserves, and create a strategic oil reserve that will defend our nation against the potential for foreign invaders or foreign depletions in oil supplies. All of that is in preparation for what I think is the inevitable reality that our country is going to have to become a protectionist nation. Now, right now, we are being played by multinational corporations that buy off our government officials and get these elections rigged currently so that the officials keep in power. And those officials keep giving those corporate people and those multinational corporations all kinds of big benefits, which our nation can't afford. So austerity will become the name of the game for America in the future. And the plan, I believe, will be to just stay afloat while all the rest of the world begins to collapse economically. The global economic collapse has been foreseen for years. The limitations on resources are very well noted, and the American way of life cannot possibly be exported to countries like China or India. It just won't work. You see, globalization has been the big scam, the big lie that both the Democrats and Republicans have endorsed. Well, I've had it with the idea of foreign countries coming in and telling us what to do. I assure you that as your president, I will act to support the American people first and foremost. And I'll make sure that we pay Americans first, making sure that non-U.S. citizens don't get money that they didn't work to pay for. So all of that is coming with my approach to government so that we can get our nation back on its feet economically and stabilize the way we live our life so that we no longer have to live our life in fear of foreign competition taking away our jobs, so that we can all start to get a fair-priced education, help our kids get on their feet and get a job right away out of college. All of that is coming. The idea that our country can be insulated from the world economy is very real. We've got enough resources right here to do just that. And we can have our own energy supply. And we can tell the oil companies to go take a hike because they don't and should not dictate policy in America. They need to get out of the White House where they're camped out in Obama's office. They need to get out of Congress where they give people kickbacks and big donations to their campaigns. The big oil and coal companies are controlling the future of our energy needs. They are actually making inefficient vehicles just to support the oil companies. They're actually suppressing patents that actually can get mileage as high as 75 to 100 miles per gallon. And all of this has gone under the nose of our two-party system, which continually neglects the reality that we need to innovate and we need to get more efficient vehicles so that our nation can be energy efficient. Well, we will continue this discussion next week as this dilemma unfolds with the world economy, and they won't be able to mask it over anymore with positive, bright statistics like they're putting out right now in the Soviet-style manner that our propaganda machine is engaged in. I'm David John Sponheim, and I support this message.
ATP, you and me.